Hi, and welcome to this special Business Beyond live Q&A about the economic visions of U.S. presidential candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Voters in the United States have consistently ranked the economy as a top issue for the 2024 presidential election, and whoever moves into the White House will not just impact the economy inside the country, but also U.S. economic relations around the world. So today we are taking a look at how Kamala Harris and Donald Trump would approach economic policy. Please comment any questions you have around the presidential candidates' economic plans in the chat. And to answer those questions, I'm now joined by DW's U.S. correspondent Janelle Dumalaon, who is in Washington, D.C. And joining us from Berkeley, California is Maurice Obstfeld. He's an economist at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Thank you both for coming on today. And let me start by asking a question from YouTube user K.Aqua. They ask, with the rise of AI and automation, how do the policies of Harris and Trump support job creation and workforce adaptation in industries being disrupted by technology? Janelle, do you want to answer that one?
K.Aqua, that's a really interesting question. And, you know, I've listened to both of these candidates on the trail, and I would say that the topic of artificial intelligence and its potential to disrupt the job market, its potential for job creation, that's not something that has been as prominent as the other topics, but it has come up. And, you know, the thing with Donald Trump is that he has been president, and there have been things that have come up during his presidency. He was, for example, the first president to sign an AI executive order, looking at prioritizing federal spending in terms of AI research and innovation, and that is something that he did, if you like, pioneer at. Now, in terms of Kamala Harris, she has said that she would extend certain parts of Joe Biden's sweeping AI executive order. He signed one last year, and it had a lot to do with the sort of protecting consumers and users from privacy issues. It had a lot to do with protecting them from algorithmic bias, but there was also a lot in there about supporting workers and studying the potential impact of AI on the labor market and what the federal government could do to support that. So Kamala Harris said that she was going to continue on and look for other opportunities. And that way, she's also seen as someone who has a lot of contacts in the tech community and someone who has an understanding of the complexity of these issues, because also over time as the state attorney of California. Now, for Trump's part, however, in terms of looking to the future, I already told you that he signed the first ever AI executive order as U.S. president, but he did say that he would be repealing Joe Biden's own order. He called it, I wrote it down here, he said, "We will repeal Joe Biden's dangerous executive order that hinders AI innovation and imposes radical left-wing ideas on the development of this technology." So, as always, it's kind of hard to separate the policy from the politics, what's going to be done versus what is said. But that is what has been sort of expressed from both sides so far when it comes to AI and the job force and the job market.
Right. Thanks for that insight, Janelle. We have another question from Michael X7328. He asks, how do the candidates' views differ on U.S. fiscal policy and on printing money? Maurice, what do we know about that?
Well, I take the question on printing money to be primarily about monetary policy. So fiscal and monetary policy. One large issue for the U.S. is that the federal debt is higher than at any time since the end of the Second World War. It's on track to be higher still. and the deficit is also high. And neither candidate has really expressed a plan for grappling with that problem. Now, on the campaign trail, Donald Trump has been proposing tax cuts, seemingly a new one every week. The latest one is not to tax the incomes of Americans living abroad who are in countries. But it's a bewildering array of promises. And together, private forecasters suggest that these might increase the federal deficit by as much as $7 billion over the next 10 years. Harris has been suggesting a limited range of initiatives, such as providing enhanced support for startups, support for first-time home buyers, now deploying Medicare to provide elder care in homes. And these are also expensive programs. They probably add up to less than half of what Trump is proposing, but they still pose a challenge for fiscal policy, which Harris proposes to address by tax increases on higher income earners, what she says would be having the rich pay their fair share. Now, of course, all of these things would require congressional action. So they are just plans. In terms of monetary policy, I think the differences couldn't be starker between the two candidates. Harris would continue the tradition of allowing the Fed to be independent and not pressuring the Fed to take monetary actions that are politically expedient. Trump's team has talked about establishing more presidential control over monetary policy.
Could I just jump in there? As you mentioned, Trump's team has talked about the Fed no longer being an independent body that decides over interest rates. Is that something that would be legally feasible to do, to take away independence of the Fed?
There are different levels of ways in which the president can exert pressure on the Fed. Certainly appointing new members to the board, appointing a new Fed chair, which he will have the opportunity to do in 2026. And, you know, at the extreme, were he to gain control of both houses of Congress, he might be able to do statutory changes that could give him more control. I mean, the latest idea, which Heather Long of the Washington Post tweeted about this morning, is that he would appoint a shadow Fed chair ahead of Jay Powell's departure, who would not have formal powers, but would in effect turn Powell into a kind of lame duck with counter programming about monetary policy coming from Trump's desired pick. So I think we shouldn't discount the possibility of these actions putting serious pressure on the Fed, and just the constant pressure of presidential commentary on the Fed's actions has an impact on markets, because it indicates the direction in which Trump would like to go once he gets the opportunity to pick his own Federal Reserve chairman. I think these are profoundly dangerous plans. You know well in Germany the importance of an independent central bank. The record of the Deutsche Bundesbank in controlling inflation has been incredibly strong, and a lot of that tradition was written into the ECB's statutes. So I do worry about this quite a bit. And you combine this with Trump's stated goal of a weaker dollar, which is best carried out through low interest rates. And you do get a potential environment in which inflation gets out of control.
Right. We have more questions coming in. One from Me Pluribus Unum. Do tariffs get paid by the exporting countries, as Trump states, or is the added cost passed on to the end consumer, as Harris states? Janelle, do you want to take that one?
Well, I think generally so a lot has been made out of the differing attitudes of the two candidates when it comes to world trade, when it comes to tariffs. So I think if you look at kind of what Harris's approach, what her mindset is, she's going to be an internationalist. She's going to respect alliances. She's going to respect the rules-based order when it comes to trade. Trump views everything from a deal-making mindset. He's a consummate deal-maker. Everything to him is a negotiation, even with countries where the U.S. has long-standing alliances or partnerships. Now, as to, the thing that has become clear is that while they differ very much in their mindsets and their approaches, some of the tools that they are willing to use to wield industrial policy are quite similar. They're both quite willing to use tariffs. So remember the trade war in Trump's first term, where he imposed a lot of tariffs on especially Chinese imports. And then fast forward to Biden's administration, they kept many of those tariffs on and even added on a few, increased some while introducing some new ones. So that kind of shows us that, tariffs are on the table for both candidates. But whether it ends up being tacked on to the costs of the end consumer, I think that is something that you can say will happen, because you also have to think that not all traded products are homogeneous. We're not just talking about soybeans and strawberries. We're talking about, let's say, Chinese auto parts, for example, that would go into an American car manufacturer's assembly line. So a lot of the imports are for intermediate parts. A lot of them, they can't just be sourced from other countries. Perhaps they would need that particular Chinese part. As such, this particular car company would simply have to end up paying more. He would have to increase its cost of production, and that could end up getting passed on to the consumer. Now, I think it's a lot more complicated than a one-to-one thing. So, the tariffs increase cost by this much, and therefore the consumer will have to pay this much more in the end. That's not quite how it works. It also has to do with how those costs are distributed within each respective company, and so on, and what the company then decides to actually then do with its pricing. But I think in general, it is fair to say that higher tariffs could make things more expensive for the end consumers, yes.
Right, and related...
And I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the username, so thank you for that question. And
Me Pluribus Unum.
Could I jump in on that, Marie?
Oh.
Of course.
Yeah, I think the evidence of industry by industry studies concerning the last round of Trump tariffs is that the tariff was fully passed through to U.S. importers, whether they be consumers or firms. And some firms took a hit to their profits, but of course that's negative for investment by those firms. So the idea that that President Trump, former President Trump, has pushed that the tariff is a tax on the foreign country is almost entirely false. Going back to the last question on fiscal policy, it's worth mentioning that the Trump fiscal plan puts a lot of weight on the revenue from tariffs, and he's even floated the idea of using that revenue to replace the U.S. income tax, which would take the U.S. back to the situation that existed before the 16th Amendment to the Constitution made a graduated income tax constitutional. And a major difference between Harris's potential use of tariffs and Trump's is that Trump is proposing universal tariffs, 10 to 20% on everything except Chinese imports, which would be 60%. And that's a huge difference between the two candidates.
Right, and going off of this tariff discussion, we have a question by Carolina Vilena, who asks, which of these two is globally friendly? Meaning, I think, which of these two candidates is better for the global economy? This is also something, Janelle, you've reported on for Business Beyond, so maybe you'd like to start on that answer.
Carolina Vilena, thank you very much again for the question. So, as Maurice said, I did a report sort of comparing Trump and Harris when it comes to things that affect the world economy, things like trade and things like energy. And I alluded to it already today, I think, in the course of this discussion. But I think it really is going to make a big difference that Harris will come with a cooperative mindset towards global partners and allies, whether in trading or in security. And Trump will come with perhaps a more adversarial, America first attitude. Now, a better or worse, it's like these are value judgments, right? But, if we were to talk about preferences, I think that will vary from leader to leader. But I also think what Harris might provide is a measure of predictability. She's expected to carry over a lot of Joe Biden's more let's say, internationalist, multilateralist instinct. So she's going to want to cooperate with other countries when it comes to, let's say, the promotion of renewable energies, when it comes to fair trading practices. Nobody is really looking at her as someone who would advance the trade liberalization ball, so to speak. She's not been very vocal about her support for free trade agreements. She's in the past scrutinized them very closely for the environmental aspects. And as I said earlier, she is someone who is not completely willing to take tariffs off the table. But in general, she would be less. Let's use the word disruptive. I think we can use that. She would be less disruptive to international trade, and as such, you could see a lot of the U.S.'s partners preferring that. When it comes to Trump, like I said earlier, America first, very deal-making approach. He wants to use the tariffs as a sort of bargaining chip. From my perspective, to get other countries to do what he wants. He also, in the course of my reporting for that comparison video that I did of Harris and Trump that we talked about, we also looked at some of his policies. For example, how he also phrases things. He says he wants America to be energy dominant. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Perhaps it's a little bit more than energy independent, but couched in these maximalist Trump terms. But for example, his key to energy dominance, as he calls it, is allowing drilling to go on quasi indiscriminately. So he wants oil to be drilled on federal lands. He wants to be able to allow that, drill baby drill. He's been saying this for years, and this is something that I think he has kept with him. But I also don't quite, for example, understand how he could do that. Oil is like oil. There's a world market for oil. It's like the world market determines the price of oil. He can't just make it cheaper for Americans by drilling a lot in America. And there's also this question of how he would do that. How would oil drillers be incentivized to keep drilling if the prices are brought down rock bottom? What would be in it for them? So. A long way to answer your question, so I apologize about that. But I think the themes that I want to return to here are Kamala Harris's basic outward-friendly approach towards the U.S.'s partners and allies, relative predictability because she will carry over a lot of Joe Biden's policies, and we've seen them before, and then the international community. Other governments in the world would know what to expect, and then you have Trump, who will be seeking advantage basically everywhere he goes.
Right, and just a reminder to our viewers, please comment any questions you have around the presidential candidate's economic plans in the chat, and we will try to answer as many of them as possible. I have another question from Carolina Vilena, which is, will these platforms from Harris or Trump benefit lower classes? This is a big question. Basically, the way I'm reading is whose platform will be more beneficial for low-income earners? Maurice, maybe you want to tackle that one.
Yeah, I think there's no question that the Harris platform is more friendly toward lower income workers, toward the middle class, if you want to put it that way, as the campaigns do. As I said in response to the earlier question on fiscal policy, Trump is proposing a suite of tax reductions, but those overwhelmingly favor the upper classes, the upper registers of income. For example, he's proposed extending the tax cuts of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed under his administration, which lowers taxes at the highest marginal level. He is also proposing to lower the corporate tax. He's proposing to eliminate taxes on Social Security recipients, regardless of income. So that means that even if you are a Social Security recipient with a relatively high income because you've accumulated a lot of private wealth, you would still get a tax break.
Right, but he's also proposed eliminating, for example, taxes on tips, right? So. Right,
but that's a large topic. It's a very small set of earners, and it raises the possibility that a lot of companies might move to tip-based compensation in order to benefit from that. But that's quite minor compared to the other elements of his program.
Janelle, you seem to want to pitch in.
You want to come in, Janelle?
Yeah, no, I just wanted, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask questions in this format, but while we have you, Maurice, because I was sort of mulling over the no taxation on tipped wages thing, and I have to say, I'm not sure I quite follow the logic. What should be the difference between, say, somebody earning $50,000 on a straight salary and $50,000 on tipped wages, and why should one be taxed and the other not? Can you perhaps give us the economic argument for that? Because I didn't quite follow.
It's about winning the state of Nevada. It's about winning the state of Nevada. That's the logic. I mean, very simply.
Right. So it's not an economic space, it's just trying to win the state of Nevada where a lot of wages are tipped wages.
Yes, absolutely. And Harris signed on to it for the same reason. There's no underlying rationale.
Right. Just to clarify, Harris has also said that she would get rid of taxes on tips. So this is a policy by both candidates at this point.
But you know, every other Trump tax. I mean, again, the tariff. You know, the U.S. over 100 years ago, the progressive movement in the U.S., where there was vast inequality, pushed hard to introduce a graduated progressive income tax so that the rich could be taxed relatively more heavily or pay a fair share of taxes. Tariff revenue was extremely regressive, is extremely regressive. And Trump wants to basically move back to the 19th century, which was the age of huge wealth inequality of the U.S., of trusts, of robber barons. You know, it's just you know, an incredibly regressive set of policies. Moving to the spending side, I think a lot of the things that Harris is proposing, aid to first-time home buyers, and the like, you know, whether you think they are good policies or not, and we can discuss that, there are issues there, would be fairly progressive.
Right. I have a future-looking question here from Kofi. Kofi asks, looking at long-term competitiveness, what impact could their policies have on access to critical tech like semiconductors and green technologies, and how might this shape the future of U.S. innovation? Janelle?
I'll have to think about that one a little bit. You can hand it over to Maurice.
Maurice?
The question was about
access to critical tech.
Long-term competitiveness in tech.
Looking at long-term competitiveness, what impact could the policies of either Trump or Harris have on the access to critical tech like semiconductors and like green technologies?
Well, the semiconductor space is one that's very contentious now, given the conflicts between the U.S. and China. You know, clearly the thrust of the Biden administration has been to build up domestic semiconductor capacity within the U.S. It faces challenges of a U.S. workforce that is probably not as well suited for that. And that in turn raises the issue of, you know, where I think the real challenge for U.S. competitiveness is in the education system and in training for workers. So you may have noticed my cat here. I'm sorry about that.
No worries. But let's stay on semiconductors for a second. Do you think that this plan to become independent, self-sufficient when it comes to semiconductors is a realistic one that could be reached within the next administration, whichever administration it would be?
I think it would be hard to do. I think there can be more, somewhat more domestic production. You know, clearly the situation in which so much production is centered in Taiwan, given the geopolitical tensions in that area, is not really sustainable. But there's much more of an infrastructure need in the U.S. if this is become a reality, and the U.S. needs more trained workers who can work in this industry. So I think it requires more than just what has been done so far.
Right.
Yeah, Marie. I just think it's a really difficult. It's a really difficult question, right? Like, because you definitely did have things put in place, like via the Inflation Reduction Act, in order to protect the semiconductor industry in the U.S., in order to be able to develop it. There has certainly been a lot of investment going into that direction. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's like we are in a race for these global critical technologies. There's also a really strong security component to it. So I think to what Maurice was saying, it has a lot to do with educating the workforce. It has a lot to do with the fact that these are very difficult industries. We also talked earlier about how we don't know what will be done for tech workers depending on who comes to power. So, as such, I really do have difficulty landing on a definite answer in terms of competitiveness and what these two candidates will be able to do long term for the semiconductor industry.
Right, potentially too many moving parts to answer right now. I have another question that's more focused on the global economy by Lucas V7S, which is, what would the impact on the global economy be of Trump's proposed levies on most imports? So maybe concretely, how would Europeans feel those levies from the other side of the table? Whoever would like to answer can go first.
Maybe I can come in on that. First by adding a little bit to Janelle's answer from before on global cooperation. I think Donald Trump essentially takes a zero-sum view of the world in terms of trade policy. What the U.S. Gains, other countries lose. What other countries gain, the U.S. loses. And that's part of the underlying rationale for his tariff policy. And one of the big implications of that approach, I think, is that we're very likely to embark on a global trade war if he is elected and if he implements the across-the-board tariffs he's suggesting. I suspect that Europe is going to try to bargain with him to avoid these tariffs, which would basically reduce their market access to the United States. But at the end of the day, I don't think Europe will be passive if they don't get a deal that they would like, and I think they would retaliate as they did in the last round of tariffs. Now, what we know from the Great Depression is that trade wars are very costly in terms of economic activity, in terms of employment, and so I think that's a frightening prospect. I also don't know how the whole China angle will feed into that. Clearly, Europe is taking a very different attitude toward China, a very different approach than what Trump is proposing.
Could you elaborate a bit on the difference there?
Well, I think Europe is, for example, I think Europe is taking an approach to, for example, Chinese electric vehicles that is more in line with WTO practice. To some extent, Europe is trying to play by multilateral rules. Trump has no intention of doing that. And that's true in other areas, too, of international cooperation. Trump will surely withdraw once again from the Paris Agreement, which Biden rejoined when he came into office. So, the whole set of climate issues will not be addressed in any effective way if Trump is in office.
Janelle, do you want to weigh in on the effect of tariffs that could be felt here in Europe if Trump were to become president?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I hope I'm not repeating some of what Maurice said because the connection cut in and out sometimes. But I also think and forgive me again if this has been mentioned already, but the potential for ever escalating tit for tat rounds, right? Like, because countries, of course, will have to respond to the import tariffs that the U.S. puts up. They'll respond with their own tariffs, and then it's hard to see once that dynamic starts when it could end, and that could, in the worst case scenario, end up being a race to the bottom. But because, and I think he did mention this, he did mention Chinese electrical vehicles, and this is one of those categories where Trump and Harris would seem to be in agreement about the need to protect the domestic electrical vehicle industry by putting tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, which are, of course, cheaper. And I think those tariffs are set at 100% here. But I think what that story teaches us is that these decisions don't stay in the U.S. Of course, if the U.S. Has to put a tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, then Europe, as we know, it's also voted. The European Commission has also voted to put their own in. They can't react, because then those Chinese electric vehicles will have to go somewhere. Europe doesn't want to see themselves inundated. So as such, they have to take measures themselves. So I think this is another indication of just how consequential and how impactful U.S. policy decisions are for the rest of the world. And world trade is one of those areas where we see that.
Right, thank you for that. And we have our last question from Philip Pfeffer, who asks, what are the strategies by Harris and Trump to tackle the worker shortage in the United States? Maurice, this is something you already touched on briefly by talking about education, right?
Yeah, well, there's a shortage of skilled workers, for sure. And I don't think the Trump plan has huge investment in education. In fact, the Trump plan I think Trump's answer to almost everything is tariffs, and his idea is that high tariffs will restore U.S. manufacturing. U.S. manufacturing will create good jobs. These good jobs will pay high wages, and the U.S. will return to its manufacturing prominence of decades past. There isn't really a realistic story about where these workers will come from. I think the intellectual proponents on the Republican side of these theories think that there are a lot of discouraged workers who will re-enter the labor force if good jobs are available. Now,
how would you say that Trump's plans, though, if we move away from tariffs, but Trump has also pledged to deport undocumented immigrants in the United States? Yeah. How would that affect?
That's what I was about to say, Marie, that on the other side, one of the reasons why U.S. growth has been solid for the past few years of the recovery, why inflation has come down rather quickly in the U.S., is that Biden has allowed more legal immigration. Trump would turn that back. He would also deport millions and millions of workers. And that would administer a huge negative macro shock to the U.S. economy. At the Peterson Institute, where I'm a fellow, a team has used a global macroeconomic model to look at the effects of this on U.S. GDP and on inflation, and they're fairly devastating. If this comes to pass, not only would it not help the worker problem in the U.S., it would have very negative macro effects.
Right, Janelle.
Yeah, Marie, if I could just add to that.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes, please, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was
I was just
going
going to say, like, just to add to Maurice's point, yes, about immigration, just on the discursive level, right? I think a lot of the problem with Trump's rhetoric as well is that he's sort of painting an inaccurate, let's call it that, an accurate view of who is actually coming into the country. He's doing this thing where he's painting lots and lots of people coming in as giant hordes of drug dealers, of criminals, of people who have nothing to contribute to society, when in fact, one of the greatest strengths, of course, of the United States is just how many skilled and educated workers it attracts. If you look at, all you have to do is look at the top tech companies that are in fact headed up by CEOs. And I think the more of the more of that kind of rhetoric, the more this sort of nativist and occasionally downright racist rhetoric comes from Trump. I think that gets lost in the discussion, that a lot of the people coming to the country are exactly the kind of people that you would need to propel America forward in as many key industries as you can name.
Right, and we've been focusing on Trump for this specific question, but what, if any, proposals has Harris put forward when it comes to a skilled labor shortage? Maurice, perhaps.
Well, if you look at the provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, there is some investment in there in basic education at the community college level that would allow a better pipeline of workers into industries like batteries, electric vehicles, but it's not on a scale that is adequate. And I would say that neither candidate is dealing with the full scale of the type of investment in the workforce that America needs. Again, Trump's idea is that tariffs and bringing back manufacturing will solve the problem. I think Harris recognizes that there needs to be more government support, but this hasn't been the focus of the plans that she has put forth so far.
Right, so maybe limited amounts of vision coming from both candidates here. I think this wraps up this live Q&A hosted by Business Beyond. Thank you so much for sending in your questions, and thanks to Janelle and Maurice for your insights and your answers, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.